dead?
I don't know.
Yeah, oh, no?
All right, camera Zoom, you still hear me okay?
Now they're both on.
Excellent. Working.
It's okay. I told I asked Charlie over another. I'll send it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mashin. Sorry to bother. All right, to both say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this month of Menachem. I have to thank Benjamin and Elise Wall and Latanya Eretz Yisrael for dedicating all of the Sherman Joshua's this month in honor of Moshe Abramson and Jeremy Lassen, who enable all of those outside of our physical-based medrash to be able to participate in our shiurim. To thank Mr. Jack Bennett for dedicating all the Sherman Joshua's this month in memory of Sergeant Nikolai Rappaport of the Givati Brigade, who died in a Hezbollah ambush in southern Lebanon in February of 1998. And to thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Nathan and Beth Adler, for dedicating all the Sherman this week in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Nathan's father, Chaver Baruch Mordechai ben Morenu Rav Nassan. And to thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Reb Daniel Golfez, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of his father, Yitzchak ben Aga Sela. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, and the families in Nechama. But so with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Pei Vav. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. A really interesting and fascinating daf. So 86, we are picking up on 85b, Pei Hey Amud Beis, and we left off Amra Baye, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17 lines up from the bottom. So if you remember again, in yesterday's Mishnah, we were introduced to the really interesting machlokes in Rabbanon and Rabbi Huda as to what is the ikar verbiage of the get. According to the Rabbanon, the ikar really is hariat mutaris l'chol adam. Excuse me, that's the ikar, right? That's the ikar. You are permitted to every man. Rabbi Huda says, no, that is not enough. You need to be much more explicit in the lashon. And Rabbi Huda went through essentially the entire, we'll call it, permitting language of the get. Remember again, Rabbi Huda is not laying in front of us the entire verbiage of the get, because there's a lot that goes into a get, but rather this is the lashon. This is the lashon that activates the get. Remember again, if there's one thing we know, the entire essence of a get is to be a sefer krisos. It's to be a document that fundamentally ends and dissolves any level of marriage between two people. Rabbi Huda says you have to have explicit wording to that effect, and that's the wording he espoused in the Mishnah. So we're going to pick up on this. So Rabbi, Haiman the cause of Gita, person who goes ahead and writes a get, lo lichtov v'din dimashma v'din ella v'din. So now listen to this. So he writes over here in Rabbi Huda. We're just going to pretty much go through Rabbi Huda's lashon. The lashon was v'dan diyehevi lechiminai sefer teruchin. This should be to you from me a book. We'll get into all these lashonos. So Rabbi is just saying, don't write v'dan with a yud, because then it looks like din, which looks like a judgment. And that's not the word. The word is supposed to be and this. V'lo lichtov igeras demashma igeras ele igeras. Don't write igeres with a yud, write igeres without a yud. Because apparently igeres in a yud, with a yud in Aramaic, could mean a roof. Could mean a roof. So don't write it with a yud, write it without a yud. Okay. Don't write limehach, but rather, because again, limehach sounds like it's a contraction of two words. Li, for me, mehach, from this. And don't write it with a ches. Because it looks like, again, chucha is a joke. It looks like you're writing a joke. Diis havyon, diis yatzvon, tlasa yudin. When we're writing the words yishasvan, ultimately you will be permitted. Diis yatzvon, write it with 3 yuds each. Dimashma tehavyon v'tetzivin. Because again, we'll say what those words mean. You'll be permitted and want. Velorche levav de teruchin or levav de shvukin demashra trichin ushvikin, and elongate the vav of teruchin and shvukin. Remember again, teruchin means banishment. Shvukin means Shivukim we saw in the Mishnah. I'm sorry, Turuchim banished and Shivukim means abandoned. Of elongate the vav of those two letters. The vav the shugid the mashma trichinu shrikin. Velarche the vav de kado, and go ahead and elongate the vav of kado the mashma ukadi. And ultimately, again, because it has the mashma also the translation of kidi of nothing. There's nothing left between us. Velo lichtov leis nasba. The mashma lo yisnaspa. Don't write that this get should allow leisnaspa. And I will say, technically speaking, leisnaspa could be translated as to remarry. The problem is it could also look like a contraction of two words, lo yisnaspa. You may not remarry. Ella lehisnaspa. Okay, so I will say, so these are just all the different words. These are, the Gemara is just pointing out over here how, whereas normally in shtaros, all you need to do is make sure both parties know what the shtar is talking about. When it comes to Gittin, what the Gemara is pointing out over here is make sure that the wording leaves nothing to the imagination, and make sure that it's understood. Ultimately, again, that the wording should not have any connotation of binding two people together, but lahefech should make every connotation of dissolving a marriage. Okay, so the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara goes weiter. Ibailu, ba'inan v'dan, although ba'inan v'dan. So now the Gemara asks, by the way, so do you need this lashon of Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah? Do you need it? The Gemara is calling it v'dan. Do you need it? Or maybe it's just enough to go ahead and say, hari'at mutares l'chol adam. To which the Gemara says, Tashma, the Iskin Rabbi Begide, Rava instituted the following wording in a get. Eich planya bar planya, pater v'tarich yas plonisa insisa. And again, the wording of the get was, right, so-and-so, the husband, the son of so-and-so, right, pater v'tarich, literally went ahead and freed, right? And tarach, I will say, is lashon literally of banishment. The idea over here is we're trying to use extreme wording to indicate that this couple is no longer together. Yes, planisa insisa, so-and-so his wife, dahavis insisa min kadam dana, miyoma dinan uli olam. Who was his wife and is no longer his wife from this day forward and forever. Now the Gemara points out, if you notice in this lashon, v'ilu v'dan lo ka'amar. Apparently Rava didn't use the lashon of v'dan, to which the Gemara says, v'letameich kul hu mi ka'amar. Did he use all of the other lashonos as well? Ella ba'inan hachanai ba'inan. Rather, again, I will say, the Gemara is not meaning to convey to us the entire text that Rava used, rather a sample of the text, but it must be that Rava actually did use the lashon of vidan as well. So I will say, the conclusion that the Gemara seems to be reaching over here is that halacha l'maisa, hare'atnu taras l'chol adam is not going to be enough by itself. One is going to go ahead and need a more amplified. It's actually interesting. I just yesterday, so in town over here, Rabbi Yomi Benuitz is the one who was Mesader Gittin. So I actually reached out to him yesterday if he happened to have a copy of a get handy. So he sent it to me. After we get through the sugya, the names are blocked out, but after we get through the sugya, I'm going to share it with you, and you're going to see it's quite fascinating to see how a lot of the lashonos that we are picking up over the course of the Gemara are in fact used contemporarily in the get as well. So we'll go through it inside together. Let's go weiter. So the Gemara says as follows: Miyom dinan lafukim Rabbi Yossi. So we'll say we use lashon of Miyom dinan from this day to exclude the position of Rabbi Yossi. The Amar Zmano Shel Shtar Mochiach. So we'll say, according to Rabbi Yossi holds that the date on the get is what tells you when the get is effective as of. So technically speaking, once you have a date, you don't have to say Miyoma Dinan from this day. So the Gemara says, no, we still use the lashon of Miyoma Dinan because we don't just simply rely on the date. All right, uli olam, and we'll say, what does it mean, uli olam? Forever. Top of pevav. La fuke midabay minei Rav Merav Nachman damar hayom iat ishti ulamachar atish. Remember we had this case a couple of days ago that a man gives his wife a get and with a condition. What's the condition? Today we're divorced, but tomorrow you're my wife. tomorrow you're my wife. So we'll say, so remember again, we dafki use the lashon of the olam in a get. Why? What does the olam mean? Well, it means forever. That once the marriage is severed, it's severed. Again, you can remarry if, assuming it's not a Kohen and his ex-wife. But lamaisa, once the marriage is dissolved, that marriage is dissolved. Good. Gufo shall get shechra. We'll say top of Pevav 86a, third line down. Gufo shall get shechra. Hariat bas chorin, hariat liatzmech. Okay, so we'll say, remember again, the Mishnah then transitioned from talking about a get for a wife for her marriage to a get shechra, a document of emancipation for an eved Kanani or a shivcha Kananis. Excuse me. So the Mishnah said that the lashon of a get shechrer is hariat bas chorin. You are a free woman. Hariat liatzmech. You belong to yourself. So iskin Rabbi Yehuda b'shtar zivini. Da'avdi. So we'll say, so Rabbi Yehuda, whenever he was selling an eved Kanani, he instituted the following lashon: Avda dinan. This eved that I'm selling you, mutztak liavdo. Ultimately, he is established as an eved. Rashi says, "Dina pasak la'avdos she'in shum irur b'mechira." In other words, he is established as an eved. No one is contesting his status as an eved. Upater va'atra min charuri, and there's no charuri on him. Rashi says over here, what does this mean? Parush umuflag Mikol Cheros. In other words, that no one's claiming that he's a free man, right? Umina uri malka umalkasa, and ultimately the king, and I will say, essentially this is saying he's lien free, right? The king, the monarchy, doesn't have any claims on him. Verashom deinish lo isli iluye, and the seal of another man, i.e., no one else has a claim on this particular eved. Uminuka mikol mum, and he is free from any blemish. Free from any blemish. In other words, you're buying an eved, I will say, you want to know that the eved is good under the hood, right? You want to make sure that Lamaisa, again, there's nothing that's going to prevent him from working. So when Rabbi Yehuda would sell an eved, he would indicate that, there's been a 4-point inspection, so there's nothing wrong with the eved. He's fine. Umin shchin dinafik ad titzar chadas va'atik. And I will say he is free from any boils that will surface within 2 years. Apparently, Rashi points out to her that there are certain boil conditions, that could come and go. So Rabbi Yehuda would say, my eved is healthy. V'harai, I'm willing to guarantee no boils, old or new, surfacing within the next 2 years. Okay, so my asuse, by the way, the Gemara says, what is the remedy for this boil condition? Right, if a person does have these boils that come and go, what's the remedy? Amrabai ginbara, ginger, umarsicha. Rashi says over here, marsichas psola sige kesef, silver, v'chabrisa, Rashi says gafris, sulfur, v'chala dechamra, and vinegar from wine vinegar, umishcha dezesa, a little bit of olive oil, right? Vinatvik chivra v'shayfi begadfa da'avza, and ultimately again white naft oil, and mix that all together, smear it on with a goose feather, and you're good to go. All right, just a little medical remedy to end out the sugi over here. Beautiful. Mishnah, Shlosha Gittin Psulin V'Nises Havlad Kasha. So we'll say, so now, here's what's interesting. In all of this discussion of Gittin, I just want to point out to you that we have one Mishnah, one Gemara about the text of the get, which is really quite fascinating. So I'll say, like I said, we'll see when we actually go through a get itself, we'll take a look and we'll see that the lashon we use essentially is a hybrid of both Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanon, using the lashon of Hariat Muteres L'Chol Adam, but at the same time incorporating some of these other lashonos as well. Beautiful. Says the Mishnah, Shlosha Gittin Psulan. There are 3 Gittin that are apostle. V'nises havlad kasher. But if a woman remarried with them, the offspring will be kasher, which we'll say is another way of saying what? Another way of saying 3 Gittin that are psulin midrabanan. So ideally, if a woman receives this kind of get, we don't want her to remarry with this get. We would want the husband to give a second valid get. But if she did use it and she did remarry with it, ultimately, again, the offspring from the second marriage are kosher. So we'll say, what are the examples? If you have a get written in the handwriting of the husband and there are no witnesses signed on it. Now, we'll say, remember again, what's interesting to note about this is as follows. What's interesting to note is, in general, why do you need witnesses? forget about what kind of witnesses for just a moment, right? Whether it's Eidei Mesira, Eidei Chasima, witnesses who sign, witnesses who see the giving over. In general, why do you need Eidos on a get? Why? Why? To make sure that it's the husband divorcing his wife. Remember again, a get has to be a husband-driven process. So you have to know that indeed this is a get from this man to this woman, that he gave it willingly. We'll say, if you think about it for just a moment, what's the greatest eidos you could ever have? The greatest eidos? That the get is written in the handwriting of the husband. So I'll say, if it's in the husband's handwriting, then again, ein eidos gidol mizu. There is no greater form of testimony that ultimately, again, the husband wanted to give this get. Otherwise, he wouldn't have written it. So this is actually quite interesting. So therefore, this is a case over ksav b'ksav yado. You have the get is written in the handwriting of the husband. Ve'in alav edim. There are no witnesses. So we'll say on a technical level, that get is kosher. Now we don't want you using that get. Because again, like anything in halacha, we like to establish a format and a process. The format is you have eidos. But technically speaking, we don't want you to use this get, but if she received this kind of get and remarried with this kind of get, the offspring will be possible. Next, there are witnesses, but there's no date. We spoke about, again, the need for a date in a get, but Lamaisa, if she remarried with a dateless get, technically it works. It has a date, but only one witness. So we'll say these are the three examples of Gittin that are possible. But if she remarried with them, ultimately the offspring will be kosher. Rabbi Eliezer says as follows: Afapi she'in alav edim, ela shenasno b'fnei edim kosher, v'gova b'nechasim mishubadim. Rabbi will say this is the famous shita of Rabbi Eliezer that goes back to the beginning of the Masechta of Eidei Mesira Karsi. Rabbi Eliezer says you don't really need Eidim to sign on the document. You just need Eidim to witness the giving over of the document. That is enough. Right? And if you do that, you could even collect from encumbered properties. She'ena Eidim chosmin ala get elam ipnei tikun ha'olam. For the only reason that Eidim sign on a get, ultimately again is for the benefit of society. Let's remember again, Rabbi Eliezer holds that really the Eidus you need is for witnesses to see the giving over of the get from husband to wife. That's what they have to witness. The only reason we have witnesses sign on the get is why? Because we'll say there's a concern, what's going to happen if the Eidei Chasima, if the Eidei Mesira can't be found? Right? Imagine again, Reuven divorces his wife. He does what he's supposed to do. He hands over the get in front of witnesses. And then sometimes later someone challenges the authenticity of the get, and you can't find the Eidei Mesira. The beauty of having Eidim signed on the get is that those signatures are forever embedded, and you can authenticate the based on those signatures. Incredible. Says the Gemara, V'sulaka, are there no other cases? I will say, so remember again, the Mishnah introduced us now to this category of Gittin that are possible midrabanan. You really shouldn't remarry with them, but if you did, it's kosher. So the Mishnah limited the list to 3. The Gemara says, are there no other cases? Are there no other examples of Gittin that are possible midrabanan, but if she remarried with them, they're still good? V'ha'ika get yashan. What about the case of get yashan? Right, they will say get yashan. Remember again, get yashan is a get. Reuven's divorcing his wife Rachel, and after he divorced and after he wrote the get, he was alone with her. There was yichud. That's called the get yashan. We learned this sugya. To which the Gemara says hasam lo teitze, hacha teitze. Here's the difference. Get yashan, if she remarried with a get yashan, she doesn't have to leave her second husband. But in the cases listed in the Mishnah, she has to leave her second husband. Verse 1 second. Hani chalaman da amar hacha teitze. So here's what's interesting. Apparently, there was a machlokes as to how to read our Mishnah. The way we just read the Mishnah was, if she remarried with these Gittin, she does not have to leave her second husband. There was an alternate reading of this Mishnah that ultimately again says she has to leave her second husband. So the Gemara says, but according to the opinion who reads the Mishnah as we just read it, that she doesn't have to leave her husband, second husband, if she receives one of these types of Gittin. So why not include get yashan in the case as well? To which the Gemara says, Hasam tinasin lechatchila, hacha di aved. So I will say, apparently in the case of get yashan, there are opinions that say that she could even remarry with this get lechatchila. Over here in the cases in the Mishnah, she can't remarry lechatchila. It's just bidi aved. If she did, we don't make her leave the second husband. I v'ha'iga get kereach. What about the case of get kereach? Well, so we just had this a few days ago. I think this was Sunday's daf. Get kereach. But was get kereach? That was the case of get makushar, a folded get, and you didn't have a signature on one of the folds. That's called a bald get, a get kereach. Hasam havlad mamzer, hacha havlad kosher. The difference of both say is that if a woman gets remarried with a get kereach, children from the second marriage are mamzerim. Here they're not. So that's fine according to Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir says anytime you deviate from rabbinic law and get married with a rabbinically invalid get, the resulting offspring from the second marriage are mamzerim. According to Rabbana who don't hold of this, what is there to say? To which the Gemara says, Hasam teitzei, hacha lo teitzei. We'll say here's the difference. Over there in the case of get kereach, we would make her leave her second marriage. In these cases, we don't make her leave the second marriage. So that's fine according to the opinion that says over here in the Mishnah she doesn't have to leave the second marriage. But according to the opinion that says even over here in these cases she has to leave second marriage, what is there to say? To which the Gemara says, B'mekushar lo kamairi. Ultimately, again, in the case of Mekushar, we're not referring to that case. Not referring to the case of Mekushar. I v'ha'ika shalom malchus. So I'll say, so just to be clear, just because it's actually a very simple process that's unfolding over here, the Mishnah said that there are three cases of a get that is possible mid'Rabbanan, and you should not get remarried with that type of get. But if you did, fine. If you did, fine. So we'll say, the Gemara is asking, aren't there other examples? Why are you limiting it to three? Aren't there other examples of Gittin that are possible mid lo teitzei? So that elamand amar teitzei ma'ikal meimar. But according to the opinion that says even in our Mishnah you have to leave the second marriage, what is there to say? To which the Gemara says, Hasam havlad mamzer, hacha havlad kasher. In the case of shalom malchus, we leave off the date of the monarchy. If you remarry with such a get, the resulting offspring are mamzerim. Here they're not. Sahani chal Rabbi Meir, el Rabbana ma'ikal meimar, mokim lakid Rabbi Meir. We'll set it up like Rabbi Meir. V'hasam havlad mamzer, hacha havlad kasher. Both say in the case of shalom malchus, if you leave off the date and you remarry with such a get, we establish that case like Rabbi Meir, and resulting offspring will be mamzerim. Here, they're not mamzerim. Fine. So we'll say, so now, what we've effectively concluded is, really, there are other cases of Gittin that are psulim mid'Rabbanan, but ultimately, again, each of them is excluded from our Mishnah for different reasons. Now, the Gemara asks a separate question. Whenever you see a number, right, whenever the Mishnah puts forward a number is always there to exclude something, right? Which makes sense. You're saying there are three cases. Three cases means what? Means what? Not four, right? There are three and not four. So obviously the Mishnah has in mind cases that is coming to exclude. So the Gemara says, what are the numbers in the Reish and Seifa coming to exclude? To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you, so, fine. Okay, we'll come back to Rashi in just a minute. The Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, so the minion, the number of the Reisha, is to exclude all of the cases we just mentioned before. The number in the Seifa comes to exclude the following case. Here we go. Tisanya. Person brings a get, ultimately again from overseas. I'll say literally again a throwback to the beginning of the Masechta. You bring a get from overseas, and the shaliach fails to say b'fanei nechtaf u b'fanei nechtam. This get was written and signed in my presence, and I will say, and he gives her the get, and she remarries with that get. Yotzi v'havlad mamzet of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir will say that get is totally ineffective. She has to leave the second marriage, and any children from the second marriage are mamzerim. The Chum say, inavlad mamzet. Chum say, no, the offspring are not mamzerim. Rather, what do you have to do? Keitzad yaseh. What should you do to remedy the situation? So yitlena heimena v'yachsar v'yetnena lo mifnei shnayim. V'yora farnechta farnechtam. All you have to do is take the get back and re-give it to her in front of two witnesses, and once again say b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam. Good. Excuse me. Good. Shmuel says, so that's the case. So next, let's go through the rest of the cases in the Mishnah. Ksav yado ve'ina lavedim. So I'll say, so case number two. Case number two in the Mishnah was handwriting of the husband. Ksav yado ve'ina lavedim. Right. So there are two. Right. So again, handwriting of the husband, no witnesses. So we spoke about on a basic level, on a biblical level, technically speaking. So such a get is good. Why? Because since it's in the handwriting of the husband, it's unequivocally clear that it's being done with his das. Being done with his das. So the verse Amarav ksav yado shaninu. Okay, we're talking about a case where it's his handwriting. To which the Gemara says, Ahia, what is that statement going on? Ilema aresha pshita. If you tell me what's going on in the first case of the Mishnah, so I'll say that's obvious. Because what's the first case of the Mishnah? Ksav yado, his handwriting. So I'll say, just want to point out, Rav is coming and making a statement, right? Rav is adding something onto the Mishnah. What is Rav adding onto the Mishnah? They were talking about a case where it's the husband's handwriting. To which the Gemara says, all right, Rav, what are you commenting on? If you're commenting on the first case of the Mishnah already says explicitly that what's the situation? It's the husband's handwriting. So I've already said that. So it must be you're commenting on a different case. Rather, you must have done at the middle case. Hariyesh alav edim. So I'll say again, what was case number two? Case number two was yesh alav edim ve'in bozman. Right? There's witnesses but no date. So I'll say, so who cares if it's in his handwriting? You have witnesses in that case. Ella as-seifa. Rather, it must be the seifa. I will say, what's the seifa? The seifa case was yesh bozman ve'ein bo ella eid echad. Case number three, I will say, was one witness. One witness. So it sounds like what Rav is saying is the case of one witness technically works when it's the husband's handwriting. So if you have husband's handwriting and one witness, ideally don't use this get. But if she did use this get and got remarried with this get, ultimately, again, right, she doesn't have to leave second husband, and the get will be kosher. So we'll say, when is that case kosher? If it's one witness, if there is a date and there's one witness, when is such a get technically kosher? Amud Beis, the dafka ksav yado. We'll say, when will a situation of having only one witness work in a get? When it's accompanied by his handwriting, which again, you could see that essentially. We'll say, what would be the logic behind that? The logic behind that is, like, again, when you have a get in the husband's handwriting, remember, we'll say, I just want to point out, it's not the pshat that eidos is its own independent, halachically mandated process. The whole point of eidos is to verify that which is recorded in the document actually happened and is true. To which the Gemara says, which the Gemara is telling us, well, if you have a get in the husband's handwriting, right, then that's a pretty good indication that there is an actual divorce over here, done in accordance with the will of the husband. The Baharaya, he wrote the get. So Rav's coming along and saying the case in the Mishnah, where the Mishnah certified a get signed by an Eid Echad, and said, although it's not an ideal get, if a woman received this get and remarried with this get, she need not leave her second husband, and the children from the second union are not mamzerim. When is that true, that a get with Eid Echad is b'diavad kosher? When it's in the handwriting of the husband. Interesting. Aval ksav sofer ve'eid lo. But I will say, but if the document is in the handwriting of the sofer, so you have the handwriting of the sofer and one aid, that is not going to be enough. So we'll say that's the position of Rav. That's the position of Rav. Shmuel says, afilu ksav sofer ve'eid, even the handwriting of the sofer and an aid echad is going to be enough. Shari shanino ksav sofer ve'eid kasher, because also we've established that if you have the handwriting of the sofer and one aid, that is enough to verify the document. The Rav Midam. According to Rav, how can you compare the cases? Hasam tinasi lechatchila, hacha di'eved. We will say here, technically speaking, one could say that lechatchila she could use it, but over there it's only b'di'eved. Ushmo lo kasha ha b'sifra mufhak, ha b'sifra delo mufhak. So we'll say it's actually very interesting. Rav wants to say that when you have the handwriting of the husband and an Eid Echad, that is enough actually to create an effective get. Shmuel says even the handwriting of the sofer is enough. But now the Gemara says, what kind of handwriting of the sofer? Again, like everything in life, there are good sofrim and there are not good sofrim, right? There are expert sofrim and there are novice sofrim. So Shmuel says, when is the handwriting of the sofer enough? When is it enough? When it's an expert sofer. Because we'll say, what's the logic behind that? An expert sofer, sofer mufhak, is only going to write a get when he receives explicit instruction from the husband. And everything is done kedasu kedin. So therefore, what Shmuel is advancing is like this. If you see a get and you recognize the handwriting as being the handwriting of an expert sofer, that's eidos. That counts as eidos. So that handwriting plus an Eid Echad is going to be enough to certify the document, the get, as a legitimate document. The both say it's fascinating, isn't it? So what you have over here is Shmuel, right? Rav saying that if you have the handwriting of the husband and an Eid Echad, Bidi Aved, that get is going to be kosher. Because you have the Eid Echad and the handwriting of the husband, which in itself is like an Eidos. Shmuel doesn't agree with that. Shmuel doesn't disagree with that. He will agree the handwriting of the husband is meaningful. He's adding on it. He's saying, by the way, if you have the handwriting of a well-known expert sofer, that also is meaningful. Right? That's also meaningful. That also goes ahead and counts for something significant. Counts for something significant. Halacha l'maisa, again, that'll count for eidos as well. Incredible. V'chein Amar Rabbi Yochanan, ksav yado shaninu. So Amar lei Rabbi Elazar, harayesh alav eidim. So Amar lei Rabbi Elazar, harayesh alav eidim. What about the case about yesh alav eidim? There are witnesses on the document. Amar lei aseifa. Ultimately, again, that's referring to the last case. Zimnin amarav teisei, zimnin amarav lo teisei. So sometimes we'll say, now this is interesting. Now, okay, fine. So that brings to a close what we just said before. So we'll say, so now what we come out within the Mishnah, are three cases where halacha l'maisa, again, the Mishnah said, these are gittin that are far from ideal, but at least the version we have in our Mishnah, as we read it on Amud Aleph, is if she remarried, right, she need not leave the second marriage. So Rav comes along and says like this, Zimnin amarav teisei, Zimnin amarav lo teisei. Sometimes Rav said in these three cases in the Mishnah that she does have to leave her second husband, and sometimes he said she doesn't have to leave second husband. So what's what? Ha-kesad, yesh labanim lo teisei. If she had children from second husband, she doesn't have to leave the marriage. Ein labanim teisei. But if she doesn't have children, she should leave the second marriage. So Rabbi will say, this is really fascinating. So Rav essentially says like this. I apologize. Allergies this morning. I'm sorry. Okay, so Rav says like this. So Rav says that halacha l'maisa, if she got remarried with one of these gittin, which are less than ideal. So if she had children, okay, we're not going to make her leave the marriage. Why? Because we'll say if you make her leave the marriage, that's going to cast the pale of mamzeris over these children. But if there's no children from the second marriage, and Rav would say she should leave the marriage. Rav would say it doesn't mean, in other words, we say leave the marriage. Ultimately, again, technically speaking, if she gets a proper get, she may be able to remarry husband number two. But halacha l'maisa, we don't want people remarrying with these types of gittin. Masiv Marzucha Bar Tovia. So Marzucha Bar Tovia raised the kasha. He said, "V'kulan shahayu bahen safek kiddushin o safek gerushin hareilu choltos v'lo misyabmos." Marzucha Bar Tovia brings up the following: any case, Rabbi say, where you have a situation of safek kiddushin or safek gerushin, right? So halacha l'maisa, if a woman is widowed without children in those situations, we make her do chalitza and we do not allow her to do yibum. Ketzad Safek Kiddushin. What's an example of Safek Kiddushin? Zarak La Kiddushin. A man throws his wife Kesef Kiddushin, or wife. Reuven throws Rachel Kesef. He throws her money and he says, Hari At Mekudesh Asli Bekesef Zu. So we'll say, now what happens? Safek Karov Lo, Safek Karov Lo. We had the sugya. Remember again, we'll say, if we're not sure, is it closer to her or is it closer to him? Zeo Safek Kiddushin. That would be a case of Safek Kiddushin. So we'll say, so just to illustrate this for just a moment, imagine for a moment Reuven is marrying Rachel, wants to marry Rachel, takes Kesef Kiddushin, he throws it to her. He says, Hari at nekudesh asli bekesef zu. What happens after he throws it? Right? He dies. Now I will say, so now what's the problem? So now the problem is, was Rachel married? Now we're not sure, was the money closer to him or closer to her? And now he's dead, right? Died without children. So now she's subject to Yibum, or is she? Because was she ever married? So this would be a case where we would mandate Chalitza and prohibit Yibum. What's the case of Safek Gerushin? Case of Gerushin is Ksav Biksav Yado Ve'in Alav Edim. So we'll say it would be an example of, right, Safek Gerushin would be his handwriting, no witnesses, right, no witnesses. Or Yesh Alav Edim Ve'in Bozman, you have witnesses but no date. Or Yesh Bozman Ve'in Bo Ela Eid Echad, or you have a date but only one aid. Hare Ze Safek Gerushin. Then I will say, now this is interesting, right? Because remember, these are the cases of our Mishnah, right? These are the three cases of our Mishnah. Yet here in the Brisa, these are being brought down as cases of. So I'll say, in our Mishnah, we said that these Gittin are invalid midrabanan. Right? Invalid midrabanan. But if you remarry with them, you don't have to leave. Here, the Gemara is saying these three cases are Safek Gerushin. We're not sure, do they affect a proper divorce or not? V'i amrit lo teitze. And if you say that if a woman got remarried, if you say, as we said before, that if a woman used one of these Gittin, these three Gittin, she does not have to leave second husband, then sarasa asya liyavume, then ultimately, again, her co-wife may come to do Yibum. Okay, so we'll say, all right, so this is a bit of a convoluted case. Let's put this out there just a second. Reuven is married to two women, Rachel and Leah. Let's assume for a moment right now that Rachel is an erva to Reuven's brother Shimon. Okay? Now I will say, so therefore again, in a typical case, or typical Yibum case, where Reuven would die without children, so what would be the Yibum status of Rachel and Leah? What would be the Yibum status? No Yibum, right? Why? Because remember, that's called Saras Erva. Whenever one of the wives is an Erva to the Yavam, by definition, again, she's obviously exempted, and she exempts her co-wife as well. Fine. Imagine the following scenario. Imagine, right, same case, still Reuven's married to Rachel, same women, Reuven's married to Rachel and Leah, and now Rachel is an Erva ultimately to Shimon. So I will say, but imagine now in this situation, what happens? Reuven divorces Rachel. Okay. Imagine for a moment, Reuven divorces Rachel with a get that's his handwriting, no witnesses. Okay. So now Rachel's divorced. Now Reuven dies without children. So I will say, so now watch this. What's the shaila? See, we thought Rachel's divorced. And if Rachel's divorced, then what's Leah's status vis-a-vis Yibum? What's Leah's status? She's mechuyeves in Yibum because she's no longer the co-wife of an erva. But the Gemara says, here's the problem. I amrit lo teitze. So I'll say, but now you just tell me that get is not really a good get. If the get wasn't really a good get, then Shimon is still married to both Rachel and Leah. Right? If Shimon's married to both Rachel and Leah, then what? Then technically speaking, both are exempt from Yibum. But if you say that Rachel doesn't have to leave her second husband, right? Doesn't have to leave her second husband with this invalid get, then people will assume it's because it's a valid get, which would then mean that technically speaking, Leah is going to do Yibum. And that is potentially problematic if you say that the get is not really good. Like I said, a bit of a convoluted case. Let's read inside. Lo teitze. And if you say that Rachel doesn't have to leave husband number two even when using this compromised get, Asya liyavume. Leah is going to end up doing Yibum. To which the Gemara says, fine. Let her do Yibum. Remember again, all of these Gittin in question that we're discussing in the Mishnah, mid oraisa are good, right? Mid oraisa work. It's only mid rabbanan that ultimately, again, there's a concern over here. Levi Amrli Olam Lo Teisei. So I will say. So again, I just want to point out what's happening. This is very important. So Rav is saying in the three cases in the Mishnah of Gittin that are pasal mid rabbanan, Rav will say, if she got remarried with any of those Gittin, what's her status? Rav says, it depends. Did she have children from the second union or not? If she had children, she does not have to leave the second marriage. But if she did not have children, she has to leave the second marriage. Fascinating. So on the other hand, Levi says no. The Olam Lo Teisei. Levi says no. In all of the three cases in the Mishnah, she never has to leave the second marriage. She never has to leave the second marriage, right? And again, that's the idea of the Mishnah. These Gittin are ideally they're not great, but Allah if you're married based on them, you need not leave the second marriage. Rabbi Yochanan said the same thing. She doesn't have to leave marriage number two. Right, your father said in all of, we'll say again, the three cases in the Mishnah, right? Get is in his handwriting with no witnesses. Witnesses but no zman, or again, zman but one witness. Right? So halacha in those three cases, Levi says, quoting all these opinions, she never, I just want to be clear. Everyone would agree, what would be the ideal way to deal with these three cases? Ideal way, get a new get. Right, that's the ideal way. But if she remarried with these Gittin, ultimately need not leave the second marriage. Furthermore, you also throw another halacha, the kartzis sheba amir. So I will say this kartzis, which is this insect we'll discuss, which is in the sheaf, eina posels b'meichatos. Ultimately, again, does not invalidate with para aduma water. I will say just very quickly about this. The halacha is that if an animal drinks, remember again, we'll say paraduma water, you take spring water, mix it with the ashes of paraduma, a couple of other additives as well, and you go ahead and you sprinkle it on the person who has contracted tumas meis. If an animal drinks from that water, ultimately, generally it invalidates the water. Why? When animals drink, and then they dribble a little bit back in. That is considered as if work has been done with the water, and once work has been done with the water of paraduma, it's invalid. Apparently, if the kartzis insect drinks from it, ultimately it doesn't invalidate. Why, Rabbi say? Here's what's interesting. Little known fact. The kartzis sucks the water, does not go ahead. In other words, we'll say, you ever see something that's like when an animal drinks, like they lap it, right? So if you lap water, right, like lap it up, so ultimately some comes in, some goes out. The karts is apparently that's actual physical demonstration, right? It sucks it up, and so nothing ends up going back in. Interesting. Like a kartis and like a yeshiva bacher, right? If you ever watch, right? So the Gemara says, the kartis sheba amir eina poselas b'meichatas. Ultimately, again, doesn't pass l'meichatas. My kartis, by the way, what's the kartis? So Amar Abaye didofta de bene kipi. It is a large fly that lives in between the sheaves. So the Gemara asks a kasha on this. Maser Rab Daniel Bar Katina kala ofos posel mechatos chutz min hayonah. But once said we learned if any birds drink from the chatos waters, ultimately again it invalidates it, except for a dove. Mipnei shemotzetzes, because the dove sucks. Right? The dove sucks the water. Vem isa nisni chutz miyona b'kartzis. So why not include it? But so it doesn't. It only excludes the ona. It also doesn't exclude the kartzis, right? To which the Gemara says lo psikale the gedol lo pasla ketana lo pasla. Because the Gemara saying no. With the kartzis, it's only the large kartzis. Ultimately, again, that sucks up the water. Ultimately, again, not the small kartzis. Okay, va'at kama. By the way, so how big does the kartzis have to be to suck up everything and not to leave anything over? To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Ami ad kizayis, until the size of an olive. Okay, interesting. Rabbi Elazar Omer afapi. So we'll say, so remember again, Rabbi Elazar said in the Mishnah. Rabbi Elazar said that Allah, remember, this is Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer who holds that Allah Lamaisa Eidei Mesira Karsi, right? That everything ultimately again is about giving it over in front of the witnesses. So Rabbi Eliezer holds that Allah Lamaisa, you don't really need witnesses to sign on the document. You just need them to witness the giving over of the document. To which the Gemara says, Amar Yehuda Amarav Halacha Rabbi Eliezer begin. The halacha of Rabbi Eliezer in Gittin that Eidei Mesira Karsi, right? That the ikar, will say the ikar eidus on a get is not the eidim that sign in the get, but rather what? The eidim who actually witness the giving over of the get. Ki amri se kamei de Shmuel. When I said this over in front of Shmuel, so Amar af b'shtaros, that this is not just halacha in Gittin, Rabbi say, but it applies to other documents as well. V'Rav savar b'shtaros lo. Rav disagrees. He holds that no, we only hold like Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Eliezer in Gittin, not in other shtaros. But the Mishnah said you could even collect from encumbered properties. And I will say that lashon of collecting from encumbered properties is not a lashon by Gittin. That's a lashon by other shtaros. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer tarti amar. You're right. Rabbi Eliezer, in general, Rabbi Eliezer holds Eidei Mesira Karsi, that the witnesses who witness the giving over the document are the ones who create transactional effectiveness. He holds that that is true by Gittin and by other shtaros. Rav holds like him by Gittin, doesn't hold like him by other shtaros. V'chein Amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, halacha ki Rabbi Eliezer begin. The halacha follows Rabbi Eliezer by Gittin. Rabbi Yanai Amar Afilu reach haget einbo. Rabbi Yanai says, even Rabbi Yanai fundamentally disagrees. Rabbi Yanai says, a get must have witnesses signed in it in order for it to be effective. And if you don't have witnesses signed in the get and all you have is Eidei Mesira, there's not even Reach HaGet. Remember about Reach HaGet? Reach means like the scent of a get. Scent of a get means that sometimes even if a get is invalid, there could be some get residue that's there. He says it's not even Reach HaGet. Rabbi Yanai less like Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yanai doesn't hold Rabbi Eliezer. No, he holds like Rabbi Eliezer, but rather he's saying according to the Rabbanon, there's not even Reach HaGet. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, Amar Reish Lakish, halacha k'Rabbi Eliezer begin. The halacha follows Rabbi Eliezer that Eidei Mesira Karsi. Rabbi Yochanan says afilu Reach HaGet einbo. Rabbi Yochanan says no, it's not true. There's not even a Reach HaGet if all you have is Eidei Mesira. Leim Rabbi Yochanan, let's say Rabbi Eliezer. Does Rabbi Yochanan not hold of Rabbi Eliezer? No. He's saying, I hold like Rabbi Eliezer, but according to the Rabbanon, there's not even Reach HaGet. Shalach le Rabbi Abba bar Zav. So interestingly enough, we find ourselves back once again in one of the original machloksim in Maseches Gittin about what creates the effectiveness of the get. Is it Eidei Chasima, the witnesses who sign on the get, or Rabbi Meir, or is it Eidei Mesira, the witnesses who see the giving over of the get, Rabbi Eliezer? So you must also say, but what you begin to see from here is there is mounting support for the position of Rabbi Eliezer that Eidei Mesira Karsi. Shalach le Rabbi Abba bar Zav Lamari bar Mar. Halacha Rabbi Eliezer begin or halacha. Does halacha follow Rabbi Eliezer or not? That's the machlokes, or that's the shaila. Does it follow Rabbi Eliezer or not? In the meantime, after they asked the question before it was answered, Rav Huna passed away. Amar le Rabba Berei Hachi Amar Abba Mishmei de Rava. This is what my father said in Rava. Halacha ki Rabbi Eliezer begittin. The halacha follows Rabbi Eliezer by Gittin. Rabbi say Eidei Mesira Karsi. For Rabbi Sina habikim b'dvar halacha mishum Rabbeinu amru halacha ki Rabbi Eliezer begittin. Rabbi say, we'll have to stop over here for today. We'll pick up Emeretz Hashem with this tomorrow. But again, Emeretz Hashem very exciting because by tomorrow, we will Emeretz Hashem. We'll Emeretz Hashem go ahead and we will go ahead and get to the halachas. Also, by the way, I just want to mention this so that. So Abdav kind of added in over here. I mentioned before about the other additives to the paraduma. I didn't mean additives. There's nothing actually else added to the water. There are other parts of the para aduma process, right? So there's the eitz erez, there's the azob, there's other things, but nothing else actually itself added to the water. Thank you, David, for pointing that out. All right, we'll stop over here for today. Shkoyach tomorrow. Emeretz Hashem halacha l'maisa. Shkoyach everyone.